Breaking tonight, one of the two Republican presidential frontrunners faces a new challenge on the Fox Business debate stage after days of pummeling media attacks and a fierce pushback in defense of his own character. The stakes are high for Dr. Ben Carson tonight. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Born in 1951, there was nothing to suggest that Detroit's Ben Carson would someday embody the American dream. His mother, illiterate, and married at age 13. His father, a Baptist minister who turned out to be a bigamist with a separate secret family. When Carson was 8, his father took off. Carson's mother, Sonia, worked 2 to 3 jobs at a time to support her family, most as a domestic servant. Carson says he did poorly in school at first and developed a violent temper as a boy. But Sonia had a message for her sons. Anything is possible. She demanded that they read 2 books a week and write 2 book reports, which his mother then pretended to read. Slowly, Carson's grades improved. As a teen, he joined Detroit's junior ROTC program, quickly rising through the ranks. He graduated high school in 1969 with honors and was accepted at Yale University. At Yale, he obtained a degree in psychology and found his future wife, Candy Carson, with whom he would raise 3 sons. He went on to medical school, excelling in surgery. And by age 32, which is now in the early 80s, Carson was director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. But it was in 1987 that Carson shot to stardom, becoming the leader of the first surgery team ever to separate twins joined at the back of the head without one twin dying. Just one of the 15,000 surgeries Dr. Carson says he's performed. Today, what draws many Americans to Ben Carson is the same thing drawing the media's attention: a compelling personal narrative. His memoir, Gifted Hands, lays out a dramatic life story, one that led to a play and a movie about Dr. Carson.
Doctor?
Which child would you like to see first?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And then Dr. Carson decided to run for president, and lo and behold, became the frontrunner. And that is when media outlets decided to probe the doctor's memoir and how. Last week, CNN released a report they styled a, quote, tale of 2 Ben Carsons. In it, they challenged Dr. Carson's claim that his temper once led him to try to stab a friend named Bob, and that he attempted once to hit his own mother with a hammer. Dr. Carson's book offers those examples as evidence of his youthful rage, which he says God and his own mother helped him heal. CNN found 10 adults who knew Carson as a child 50 years ago, and 9 out of 10 did not remember a violent temper. The suggestion was clearly that Carson made it up.
We went through the yearbooks. We've called many of his classmates, found his close friends through every period of his life. And the person that he describes in these anecdotes on the campaign trail as leading up to this religious epiphany that he had cannot remember any episodes of violence.
But people interviewed by CNN who knew Carson back then are surprised by that description.
9 friends, classmates, and neighbors who grew up with Carson told CNN they have no memory of the anger or the violence that the candidate has described.
So much for being here with us tonight. Carson admitted to the Kelly File that the friend he allegedly tried to stab was, in fact, a close family member, saying he changed the names in his memoir, a fact which was not disclosed until now. However, he maintained his story was true. And sure enough, this week, a newspaper clipping was found from 1997 in which his mother, Sonia, directly supports her son's story, saying, quote, oh, that really happened. I sat him down and told him that you don't accomplish much by being a bully. You accomplish more with kindness than you ever do by being harsh. The next day, Politico picked up the deep dive, attempting to dismantle Carson's repeated claim that he was offered a, quote, full scholarship to the prestigious West Point Military Academy. Politico reported that West Point does not offer scholarships, but that, in fact, all costs are covered for all students. And it reported that Carson admitted to Politico that a central point in his inspirational personal story was fabricated: his application and acceptance into the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Explosive coverage followed.
We begin with the firestorm over Dr. Ben Carson and his claim he'd been offered a scholarship to West Point.
The story was meant to illustrate his rise from impoverished kid to renowned neurosurgeon. The trouble is, the U.S. Military Academy does not offer scholarships. Tuition is free in exchange for military service.
This isn't a gaffe. You know, if this political thing is true, this is not a gaffe. He made something up. He said something was true, being admitted to West Point on a full scholarship.
Because it is different than misremembering a story from your past. It's different than misremembering when you get into a fight, who you got into a fight with, and what happened at that time if you were in elementary school or junior high. This is lying about applying to West Point and getting a full ride there.
This is lying about applying. He made up being admitted. But Politico had its headline wrong. Dr. Carson never admitted fabricating an application to or admittance to West Point, or for that matter, actually receiving a scholarship. Instead, he stood by his story that a scholarship was offered, but he said he never accepted. He clarified that the offer was only made orally, which he had not disclosed before, and said that no formal exchange had ever occurred. Politico was then forced to change its reporting, but many in the media ignored the reversal. Then the Wall Street Journal hit the doctor with more allegations, suggesting a third anecdote from Carson's memoir was in doubt. In Gifted Hands, Carson recounts a prank on Yale's campus. He says students of a course called Perceptions 301 were informed their exams had been lost in a fire. Carson says a retake was scheduled for the next day and that the new test was ridiculously hard. Carson says many students got up and left, presumably under protest or intent on claiming they hadn't seen the retake notice. Carson, however, says he completed the test. And as one of the last students there, he says he was told that he was truly honest by the professor, who then handed him a $10 prize. Carson claimed his picture was taken by the school paper. But the media found no record of any picture of Dr. Carson in the school paper around that time, nor any record of a class by that name.
These questions undermine some of the central points that he's been making about himself. And I think that lies the danger that Ben Carson may face in the primary.
I'm not sure this is unfair. And Ben Carson always likes to talk about the fact that Barack Obama didn't have to go through this vetting. Well, he did.
I hope we won't be pushed back by Ben Carson complaining about our questions and vetting, because that's a key job.
Got him this time. Or did they? Once again, the attack seemed to fall apart. First, Carson produced a student newspaper article from The Time, recounting a prank nearly identical to the one he had described in his memoir. Then a former Yale student came forward who says, "I'm the one who organized this prank." He gave an interview to BuzzFeed, saying the story happened largely as Dr. Carson described. This is from the BuzzFeed article. Curtis Bacall, an editorial assistant at the satirical Yale Record, who says he helped write the fake test, said he was 99% certain the way Carson remembers it is correct. Bacall also backed up Carson's claim that at the end, what few students remained, it may have just been one or two, I wasn't there, received a small cash prize. Carson demanded an apology. None so far has been forthcoming. Joining me now, Guy Benson, co-author of the book End of Discussion and a Fox News contributor. Guy, good to see you.
Hey, Megyn.
So, none of these things tells us whether Ben Carson exaggerated some facts in his memoir. He may have. He may have done that. But each of the examples we've just gone through, which are the ones the media really hit him on, has seemed to fall apart in part or in whole. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that in this electoral cycle, we have a candidacy for the president who is trying to convince people that, yes, he did stab someone. That's just completely bizarre.
He tried.
He was going out, trust me, I tried to stab someone. That's a presidential candidate. But I think that the exposition that you and your team just performed there, Megyn, is so worthwhile and so important because 3 major news outlets really took a stab, so to speak, at Ben Carson this week, and they came up empty. They either totally blew the scoop or they omitted or didn't unearth relevant details that corroborated the broad arc of what Carson said. So this narrative seemed to take root in the media that Ben Carson is a serial fabulist. He makes things up out of whole cloth, And then lo and behold, bit by bit, it turned out actually no, the major thrust of these stories were true.
The thing on the scholarship really gave a lot of people pause. Like you said, he's on camera saying, I was offered a scholarship to West Point. And everybody came out, Politico came out and said, they don't offer scholarships. And yet, Guy, they use that terminology on their own website. There was an ad put out not long ago discussing scholarships at West Point. It is not beyond the possibility that some official from West Point said to a promising young African-American ROTC scholar who got into Yale, we'd love to have you at West Point, and if you come here, it'll be a full scholarship. But the media is trying to prove a negative, and that's always very tough.
Yeah, and if you're a 17-year-old kid in Ben Carson's position and you recounted his childhood and his upbringing, if you have someone from the military whispering in your ear saying, hey, you're really impressive, if you come to West Point, and by the way, you should apply, it would be free. Of course your 17-year-old brain would translate that into, oh, full scholarship. So that was a mountain out of a molehill. The Politico people really just, the headline was wrong, the lead was wrong, some details were wrong, and what was said to be a lie turned out to be a totally reasonable explanation.
And the CNN thing about going back and trying to find people who ask them whether they ever saw the violent side, which he doesn't suggest I was running around very angry. He talks about how he had a bad temper. 50 years ago, do you remember? I mean, 50 years ago, Guy, what does this prove? The point is they're ready to go after Ben Carson. He deserves to have that memoir probed. He does, fully probed and fully vetted.
Yes.
But do they have something special for this guy that they haven't had for others?
See, that's the thing. I'm a big believer in the media thoroughly vetting presidential candidates, and I wish they would do it to both sides equally. That is completely fair game, especially for someone like Carson, who's an outsider, who's an amateur politically, who's running a heavily biographical campaign. Totally fine to look into this stuff. The one thing I will say that gives me concern if I'm watching the Carson campaign is all the evidence, much of the evidence that you just laid out that was exculpatory for Carson was unearthed by BuzzFeed. It's almost as if the Carson campaign was caught flat-footed by all of this and effectively outsourced their rapid response to BuzzFeed. That doesn't give me a great feeling about their preparedness.
They got to step up their game.
Exactly right.
Here's my last one to you, and I got to go. Now, you tell me, when the media, if the media, does some sort of a deep dive into Hillary Clinton back in the 1990s when her husband was president, or prior to that when her husband was governor of Arkansas, and, you know, all the issues that we've gone through from, you know, Whitewater and her allegedly almost being indicted and so on and so forth. What are the odds that we're going to hear from many of these same media outlets, that's old news? That's not fair game.
Yep, asked and answered. Old news, Megyn. Move on.
And that's just, what, 20, 25 years ago. That's not 50. Guy, great to see you.
Thanks, Megyn.